Good evening, and welcome to the Patriot Report. I'm Cody Higley, and tonight, as always, pardon me, we're joined by Robert Landon, and our special guest is Stephen Wolf, who is running as a Republican primary candidate for state representative of the 86th district. So, Stephen, welcome to the Patriot Report.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be on here.
Yeah, we when we had our other show, we had you on. So we're glad to have you back on here. We're less than a week away from the big primary, Stephen. So how are you feeling at this point?
I'm feeling good. I've had a lot of good conversations with residents all over the district. We were up in Pleasant Township yesterday and then down through into Darby Township today here in Union County and had a lot of good conversations, good responses. I feel like a lot of momentum moving forward as we're, get the days are winding down till May 5th. So it's been good.
Now, when you're talking about campaigning in a district such as the 86th district, where it encompasses all of Union County and then also Prospect Township, Pleasant Township, Marion Township, and the city of Marion. Uh, is your approach to campaigning different depending on what township or municipality that you're visiting? I mean, I imagine that the people are quite different down in extreme southeastern Union County near Dublin and Jerome Township and would require a different approach than if you're in the city of Marion or in Jackson Township in Union County. Uh, can you talk a little bit about that? It's just something that really never gets, I think, addressed by people, but it is kind of curious.
Yeah, I would say so. Just looking at the district as a whole, um, I've said to a lot of people that I've had these conversations with and brought up, it's a very diverse district in landscape and people that have different economic backgrounds, focuses in different areas of the district. You go from Dublin and it's obviously a lot more urban, closer to suburban. Jerome Township's kind of the same way. But then you get further into Union County and it gets a lot more rural. And once you get up to Marysville, it's a unique combination of rural but suburban at the same time. That kind of continually growing small town that's now busting at the seams. It feels like. But then you get further north and you're back into that rural area: Richwood, Jackson Township, Washington Township. A lot of times, and unfortunately, having conversations with people, they feel kind of left out in a lot of these conversations. And once you get north past Broadway and Raymond, people feel they've been kind of forgotten about up in that part of the county. But yeah, once you get up into Marion County, it all depends on who you're talking to. There's different conversations that come up, but a lot of the time, for me at least, as I've been campaigning, it's a lot of the same concerns that people have, maybe to varying degrees depending on where they're at. But it's a unique district. We had a conversation back in, I believe it was November, October or November, for an economic development strategy in Union County, and we had people from all over the district, and they were talking about, okay, down in Jerome they like it this way. It's more urban, closer to Columbus, a lot more of those, a lot more happening right there. And you get to Marysville, and it feels a lot more residential and suburban, and kind of the driver of the county. But then once you get up to Richwood and that part of the county, they like it more rural, and they want to stay that way, a small town rural feel. So it depends on the people, it depends on who you're having a conversation with. But yeah, there's a lot of differences just between in Union County, and then once you get up into Marion, yeah, it's the same way through Prospect and Pleasant up into the city.
Now, I know it's hard to generalize, but um, is there a particular group or area that you seem to connect with better than the others? I mean, I know that, in like, let's say sales,
Mm-hmm.
the salesmen have a particular connection a lot of times if they're traveling around the country with a certain area or segment of the country. Is it is that relevant? I mean, is there like, oh man, I really hit it off with people in Richwood, or maybe I don't do as well in Dublin or whatever.
I wouldn't say that's the case. I think a lot of it just depends on name recognition and then the conversations you're having, especially in a primary, a Republican primary. You know, the people I'm interacting with and having conversations with, we agree on 95% of the issues that come up as Republicans and conservatives. Obviously, there's differences in how you go about certain things, but I feel like I've had a lot of good conversations and support throughout the district. Even down in Dublin, obviously it's a smaller portion. It's not the entire city. It's a little bit of Dublin. I had a lot of good conversations there, and the same through up into Richwood, and I've been up to Marion probably over the last 2 months, almost every Saturday and Sunday, and throughout the week, a couple days. Obviously varying up where we're going, but a lot of good conversations with people up there, and it resonates. The conversations we have aren't. There's obviously people that are answer the door and have a conversation, and it's a very short one, and they appreciate it. You're on your way, but I've had a lot of good in-depth conversations with people who spent 45 minutes talking with one individual, and go to the next house and it's a 15-minute conversation. So it's a lot of good responses to the campaign, and people are positive and have a good outlook on what's going on in the race, and what they're seeing on my side. So I wouldn't say it's generalized into like one community or one area of the district. I feel like we've had a lot of good turnout and results throughout the rest too.
So has have you had any, I guess, moments of enlightenment on the campaign trail where maybe something that you thought was kind of a back burner issue, when you start to get out there and pounding the pavement and talking to the folks on the ground, then you realize that there's a recurring theme, and this is something that needs immediate and serious attention? Or is it a situation where you're you really haven't changed in your perspective because maybe you were on the same page with everybody to begin with?
Yeah, I would say so. There's not been any major changes, and hey, this is one huge issue that hasn't been brought up. Obviously, to different people, different things matter. For some people, I'm very strong supporter of the Second Amendment, and there's some people I've talked with where that's their number one issue. So they focus on that, and that's where our conversation tends to go. Same thing with pro life issues. That comes up for one person, and maybe to the person next door that's not an issue that they're wanting to talk about all that much. So it just depends person to person. We've had a lot of good conversations in Marion and Marysville about a variety of issues, and obviously different areas have different focuses. With the up in Marion with the connector, it obviously hasn't been a conversation that I'm having with people down in Plain City, but those kind of conversations can tie into other issues. Maybe it's not the exact same situation, but you use that as, hey, this is happening in another part of the district, and people are seeing things differently, and then you have that conversation. You can say, hey, this is what's happening with people that are in the same district as us. So it just depends on the person. A lot of good conversations about a lot of different topics, and obviously, property tax and spending becomes a really big focus for majority of people. But it just depends person to person. Everything's different. There's a gentleman I remember having a conversation with in Marion, and we started talking about the water issues, and then we started talking about infrastructure, and then we started talking about church and kind of churches we go to, and so it all depends. Every conversation is different, and some people want to have a really long conversation. Other people want to take the door hanger or flyer we're giving out, and see you on your way, and appreciate you for coming by.
Now, Robert, you had quite a bit of experience running a campaign in the city of Marion. Do you have any advice for Stephen here over the last week of the race?
I mean, the number one thing, and it sounds like he's already doing what he can with the door to door effort. The number one thing, in my opinion, is just going door to door and hitting that as many times as you can. And it sounds like you're having a lot of great conversations, which is key. Sometimes, like, you could get a little held over by somebody that's wanting to talk a little bit too long, and you got all these doors, and that can be like a catch-22. But it can also be a spark, because if you talk to the right person, they could have a big family. They could be a business owner. They could be, you never know what the circumstance is.
Yeah.
That they're not telling you their whole life story necessarily. And that could just be like the one person that just helps, propel your campaign forward. So that would be the only thing I would say, is just hitting the doors, because now you're so close to the finish line. All of the ads and all that stuff. It is going to be what it is, but
Yeah.
most people just want to talk to the candidate and get to know you.
Yeah, I think that's a really big thing with the conversations that go for quite a while. Is a lot of those people feel like they haven't heard a lot from the politicians that they're voting on, and those issues that come up, they don't necessarily have a chance to have those conversations. So I don't I love when the conversations go long. I wish there were more of those, because there's so many people that either don't answer the door, or they're not home, so they can't. But there's a lot of people that will go in and take it and close the door and say thank you and you're on your way. And I've told plenty of people I want to have these conversations so I can get a feel for what people are thinking and feeling, and what their thoughts are on all the different issues that we're talking about, because I can only gauge so much from the interactions we have. And if
Yeah.
people aren't reaching out and having conversations with me, I don't know how they feel on something. And that's an issue that I've come into contrast with. There's a lot of these issues that are brought forward, and we're trying to have conversations, but it's hard when people aren't reaching out, or don't have that ability to, or know exactly the best way to do that. So I think the more conversations that I'm able to have with people, I'm better for it. I think the race is better for it, because when you're speaking with voters, you get a true feel for what's going on in their mind and in their home, and you can use that as a conversation point for other people when you're having conversations. Say, hey, you're not the only one that's going through this. There's a lot of issues going on here, but let's make sure we're communicating that, so everyone can kind of get a good feel for what's going on around them.
Yeah.
So what percentage of like houses do you actually get an opportunity to have a conversation? Because that's got to be very, very difficult to find people who are home.
Mm-hmm.
Is that how it is? I mean, are we talking 75% of the time somebody's not home, or what do you think your percentage is of actually finding somebody there that you can have either a brief conversation with or a long conversation with?
Yeah, I think it depends, obviously, on a lot of different factors. What day you're going out. If you're going out on a Tuesday, at 11 o'clock or 12 o'clock, there's less people home. They're out at work. But if you're going on a Saturday morning at the same time, 11 or 12, you're going to find more people that are home, mowing the yard, doing yard work, whatever it is, watching some kind of basketball or baseball right now. So It just depends on the time of day and when you're going. I would say in general during the week before 4 or 5 o'clock, it's probably one in every four houses. You have a longer than 5 minute conversation. Um, Once you get into that evening from 5:30 till about 8, it jumps up. You have more conversations with people than they're home. And I always feel bad because I hate interrupting people when they're eating dinner or just getting home from work. But the weekends are a lot better in terms of having conversations, meeting people, and it depends on where you're at. When you're in a city, you're obviously able to get to more houses a little quicker because they're all kind of right around each other. As I'm going out in the rural parts of the district, I think you brought up Jackson Township earlier. When I was going around Jackson Township, there was obviously a farther distance between each home, and that leads to more time traveling in the car. And you get to some of those homes, there's no one there because they're at work. You get to other homes, there's older people that are still at home, they're retired, they're living life that way, and you have a good conversation with them. But it just depends on a lot of different factors. But I'd say on average, every probably third or fourth home you have a decent conversation with.
Now, are you finding that you'll visit a house, you'll have a conversation, and the homeowner will mention that they have already been visited by one of your opponents. Is that something you're running into? Because I think that both Ben Weber and Wesleyan Davis are out there too,
Mhm.
campaigning hard. Um, is that something you're seeing, or are you finding that most people are saying that you have been the only state rep that they have spoken with?
I think it's a mix. Obviously, all three of us are out door knocking. That's a huge part of the campaign. Getting out and having meaningful conversations. I would say for a majority of the homes, 75% they've been visited by one or both of the other candidates in the race. You get to the other 25 and it drops down to maybe it's only two of us that have been there at that point, or they've been visited by one other person or whatever it is. And it depends. There's different, obviously, with all the different races going on between Marion and Union counties. There's a lot of people going out and about door knocking and different groups helping out with that. So it's a mixed bag, but I would say a majority of the homes have had at least two of the people in this race. I'm not sure if they've had everyone there, but then you get to some people that haven't heard from anybody yet, and so they're very happy to hear someone coming out and having a conversation with them. I think of different areas. I can't remember if I brought it up last time, but there was a woman in one of our trailer parks here in Marysville that she said, we've never had a person running for office or a candidate come out here and ask us what our thoughts are on things and what we're looking at. So it just depends. Some people don't vote as much, so obviously those people that are voting all the time tend to be the priority for a lot of races, because you can count on them coming out to vote. But I want to make sure I'm getting out to as many people as possible, not just focusing on one specific area. So it depends. Some roads are a lot more rural and kind of out of the way. Other ones are main thoroughfares, and you see a lot more people campaigning, along there in the higher population areas.
Now, I know, are you seeing, or like, I guess fielding questions or hearing concerns about national topics? I mean, we have got gas prices now in the city of Marion for regular unleaded are $4.99,
Yeah.
and there doesn't seem to be any relief in sight in the short term, at least. Is that something that you're starting to hear more complaints about, or the Iran war, or anything kind of like at a national level anti-Republican sentiment? Or since this is a primary, is that still fairly decent territory?
I would say there hasn't been much. There's the occasional conversation you might have with someone who is more worried about a federal national issue than they are at something in this race. Um, as I'm sure you guys know, the main focus for a lot of the conversations is property tax, and then you kind of look at those specific, more targeted conservative issues, guns, pro-life stuff. But there's been, maybe one or two conversations that I've had that have dealt with, real national issues. There was one woman I remember talking to that said, "Oh, I appreciate you coming out, but I'm not going to vote this time. There's too much war going on." And that was really the only conversation that was more nationally focused. The rest have been, kind of on specific issues, or just, getting more information on myself, background on myself, and my campaign. So it's been very limited, I guess, in that scope, and I think that's mainly because like you said, it's a Republican primary, so they tend to be more Republican than other people would be, obviously. So you have more support for those issues, and it just depends person to person.
Yeah.
Well, now, if you win the primary, though, Stephen, if this war in Iran continues and gas prices continue to go up, up, and up, you might be campaigning for the general, like on a moped, or or strictly walking every town and township in the district because you won't be able to afford gasoline. But
Got to get that Flintstone mobile out.
yeah,
Exactly.
get that bad boy out. But now you mentioned couple of things I want to talk here about the issues, property taxes, and then Second Amendment. Now, I think after you were on our show before, you had a little bit of uh, a snafu. It wasn't anything that you did,
Mhm.
um, but it was with the OGO, Ohio Gun Owners, which is a very active and well followed gun rights organization, and they have a heavy presence on Facebook. Well, they sent these questionnaires out to statewide candidates and trying to get their opinions on Second Amendment and gun rights issues. Well, you didn't get yours. So then you automatically by default, because you're not an elected official who has a record, a
Mhm.
prior record, legislatively or otherwise. So they gave you like an F or an FQ or whatever their rating is, and then you quickly jumped on that as you should have, and submitted, got the survey, submitted it, and now you have what, like an AQ? Is that what it is?
Yeah, it's the highest rating, the AQ for candidates that haven't had the ability to vote on gun legislation. So yeah, it was. I'm not sure exactly what happened. They said they sent it to the address that home address, and never received that. I don't know if it got lost in the mail or what, but yeah, it was a very quick turnaround there, and was able to get their survey online filled out and sent back to them. And obviously, very strong supporter of the Second Amendment and guns, so it turned out very well because I support all that. So I think it worked out for the best. A lot of good conversations came from that. A lot of good coverage and people having conversations, and I think at the beginning, negative experience, but I think it ended up being positive. Just getting my name out there more conversations online and with people that I'm going door to door with. Having more understanding of what's going on and just seeing myself more online.
So I got to ask, how many firearms are in Wolf's arsenal?
So we got two handguns, but I like to go out to Blackwing. We'll rent different things there, but a couple years ago, I was able to go down to Florida to watch the Bengals play down in Tampa. So my roommate from college lives there, and he loves guns. So we were able to go out to a shooting range and try out quite a few different. I think one of them was a type of AK, and different guns that he has. He might have an addiction to buying guns, but it was a very fun time. So nothing too crazy here, but I'd love to get out and go shooting.
What kind of handguns do you got?
I think one of them is a Ruger, and then I'd have to go look at the other one.
Okay. Do you hunt?
No, I do not. Unfortunately, I never got into it when we were younger, and living in the city, we didn't get out too much to go hunting. But we have plenty of family and friends that I'll hear from going out during deer season, bow hunting, all that kind of stuff.
So you're not anti-hunting?
No, no, not at all.
All right. Well, we've talked about. Do you want to say anything else about gun rights, Second Amendment, anything at all? Because
I would just
it's important. I
yes.
grew up, my family, uncle was a gunsmith. We all hunted, we all shot all the time. It was a family affair, extended thing. And if you went to the Higley household, they referenced the NRA. And now the NRA's kind of fallen apart, but back in the day, you would get your National Rifleman magazine in the mail, and my dad and uncles, grandpa and stuff, they'd go through it. And whatever politician, whatever grade they got from the NRA, that's who they voted for. So I think OGO's kind of stepped into that position and actually filled this huge void that was left by the NRA. But any other things out there for those Second Amendment advocates?
Yeah. I would just say, like I've said before, I'm a strong supporter. I have a lot of concerns with things that come up down in Columbus. Having worked down there, seeing a lot of the issues and bills that get brought forward, that a lot of times try to get painted as good, strong bills, but they don't necessarily support the Second Amendment, or they're different red flag laws that come up. I'm not a fan of those. And kind of seeing those trying to get slid into different bills is frustrating. But it's a strong focus of mine, making sure that we protect the Second Amendment and then law abiding gun owners and not trying to infringe on that right.
And these are Republicans, Republican leadership that are scuttling all this pro Second Amendment, pro gun rights legislation at the state house level.
Right.
You know, that's no wonder OGO is, riled up so much about a lot of these guys in Columbus because yeah, they're Republican in name only. So now an interesting development, Stephen, is what happened to one of your opponents today. I think is when it broke. So OGO did a scoring of Ben Weber, and they had given him an AQ just based on his survey responses. Well, then apparently they did some in-depth investigation through all the different connections, through all the different PACs and big money special interest donors that have been contributing to Weber's campaign, and they actually rescinded his AQ rating. Did you see this? Did you watch that video that OGO did?
I haven't seen the video yet, but I did see this. Yes.
Yeah, check that out. That's, I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Like, I mean, not trying to
Right.
lead you down this rabbit hole or whatever, but there's a lot of money, being poured into his campaign. And I mean, just privately, if you weren't running in this race, would you be concerned by that, or do you think this is like normal and acceptable?
I'm concerned at the amount of money kind of into this poured into this race in general, and I think you see that in a lot of races around the state. It's the money talks, and typically the person who's willing to give the most money to someone is whoever that politician is listening to the most. So it's concerning. I think we've had that conversation on dark money and the different groups that get involved, and then the people that want to have influence down in Columbus over different candidates. So it's obviously concerning to see in any race, but it's not a not a great situation. There needs to be a lot of reform done on dark money in general. But when you get down to the individual donations and looking at who's giving money to who, that's really important. It's that's who the focus tends to be on for those candidates is whose money they're getting, and why they're giving money to what candidate depends on one issue or another. That's why with us in my campaign, it's been focused on residents of the district, people that I've grown up with, family, friends, people from church, people in different parts of the county and district that we've had conversations with. So I think the larger and the more money a campaign tends to get, the more murky the water is, and you have to kind of do a lot more digging to see where exactly it's coming from, and who's giving money, and what that person's background is, and it's hard to make guesses, but trying to figure out why that person's giving money to what campaign, and what's kind of the result of that.
Well, I
Have you
believe
taken any PAC money?
No, we have not.
well, I believe this was Cody. I think wasn't this brought out too because he was either endorsed or somebody gave him money that was like anti Second Amendment, or there was like a group that was tied to him. Isn't that what this is?
Watch the video. That I think his name's Chris Dodds. I think is his name. The spokesman. He might be the head of OGO, Ohio Gun Owners, but he did a pretty compelling video today on Facebook on OGO's page, running through the different interests that have donated and the connections to their anti-gun advocacy, and then also a number of other very questionable um, leftist leaning motivations. Um, Rhino leading, GOP elite establishment, Republican in name only. So I thought that was very interesting. video that was released today. But again, not to focus on that, but okay. So just like with you though, Stephen,
Mhm.
if somebody came to you and let's say it was, uh, you know, the Ohio Chamber of Commerce, which now is kind of a leftist organization. I mean, they've advocated for, COVID restrictions and a lot of anti-freedom, um, left-leaning advocacy, um, open border, that sort of thing. They're LGBTQ, you name it. If they came to you and said, "Hey, man, we want to max you out on this pre-primary donation. We're going to give you 16,667 big ones to Stephen Wolf's campaign." Would you accept it?
That's where you have to have strong convictions and be able to say no to things. I not looking to accept those. I'm focused on our district and on the people in it. Um, I think you get a lot of candidates where that's obviously very enticing because it's not cheap to run a race in a campaign like this, especially the larger the race is and the district and whatever seat you're running for. But you have to have people that are willing to say no to a lot of these donations to get that money out of the races. Out of you get races and money coming in that is based from people that have no affiliation to the district, no connection, no understanding. They have one specific goal in mind, and it talks a lot about the character of the candidate. What money they're accepting, why they're accepting that, and whenever you're looking at things, and obviously you can't, you know, determine every single person that wants to reach out and give you money. Obviously they can go ahead and give, but you can also return it. And making sure that you're not just accepting money because it's being brought to you. You got to make sure that the groups you're getting money from and the people you're getting money from, you know, have those genuine connections and aren't, looking for an ulterior motive to get something they want passed or to get a specific type of person in there to get legislation passed. But I think, the money a person accepts, it speaks a lot to their character and who they are as a candidate and, what their goals are and why they're running and who the focus is on.
Now, you worked in the state house. We
Mm-hmm.
talked about that last time. So you've had a up close and personal view of how the sausage is made, I guess. Um, are these lobbyists like that blatant and direct when they're going after a politician or a would-be politician when they're making these donations? How does that process? So if I'm some lobbyist, some special interest, and I say, "Hey, I want to buy off Ben Weber," and do they go to him and say, "Hey, we'll max you out on this cycle, but this is the expectation"? I mean, is it that direct to your knowledge, or are
Well,
they?
to my
How do they
knowledge,
go
and
about?
well, to my knowledge, and obviously, look at our campaign donations. I'm not having lobbyists reach out that want to give me
You
thousands of
know,
dollars.
you know how it works
So
better than
there's,
I do, and better than Robert do. I'm not saying that you're implicated in it,
yeah,
but
no, I totally understand. I'm saying it depends. I mean, it depends on the relationship you have with lobbyists. If you're buddy with different lobbyists in Columbus, and that happens because you know a lot of times lobbyists have, I feel, outsized influence on what's going on in Columbus because they're able to be there forever. They don't ever there's no term limits on being a lobbyist, so they're there when a freshman member comes in, and then they're there when that freshman member is gone in 8 years, and they go to the state senate or wherever else they want to go to. So they have a lot of influence over what legislation gets passed. Obviously with the different groups that they represent, um, different lobbyists can represent a bunch of different groups, and it just depends on what their goal is. I'm not a huge fan of lobbying, but there's a need for it to a degree. Obviously, you have different groups that don't have a lot of voice, and they got to be able to reach out and have conversations with legislators and legislation that's affecting them. But I think you get a lot of the, and I can't speak to obviously up in DC and the federal level because it's a different beast up there. But in Columbus, it's lobbyists have a lot of influence in different conversations on legislation and helping dictate what might get more support or what people are able to do. And once you get into an election, the different fundraisers that people have, lobbyists are attending that and obviously giving money if they're not going to give money to someone that they can't support or obviously is anti whatever goal that they're trying to pass or what they're whoever they're representing wants to get passed. Um, but yeah, they have a lot of influence, and obviously, if you're able to give that much money, um, you're able to have a lot of influence over different races. And if you get a couple lobbyists together that support a certain candidate and they're wanting to give money to that race and in that campaign, then they have a lot more influence than not.
Cody, who's the founding father that predicted that these institutions will grow up around our political institutions? Because the other show we just did, you was talking about George Washington warning about parties, but who is the founding father that warned about the like basically lobbyists? They didn't use the word lobbyists, but do you remember who that
Thomas
was?
Jefferson was
Thomas Jefferson.
kind of the main. He was a good guy. It's my favorite. My favorite president was Thomas Jefferson. My least favorite founding father, by far, was Alexander Hamilton. Washington was split between the two.
Now, is that because of the musical?
Why I hate Hamilton? Hamilton wanted big government. He wanted a king. He wanted a Federal Reserve Bank. He was an SOB. I cannot stand. I think that's why they created this this whole Broadway show around Hamilton is to try to clean up his name, idolize the guy. But no, if you have a $10 bill in your pocket, you should tear it up. Or
You sure it wasn't
for,
that you got? You sure it wasn't that you got cut from the tryouts?
I wouldn't get cut. No, I would be leading that show, impressively for sure. But yeah, do you have any interesting thoughts or ideas, Stephen, on how do we clean this crap hole up? I mean, it seems to me like hopelessly corrupt, and honestly, the more I've been involved, or the more I guess in looking into the state level politics. I mean, I always followed national. I mean, since I was knee high to a grasshopper, but the more you look at the local races and the state level uh, politics, man, now I've become so much more cynical. Like I feel really, really bad about things because I'm like, man, there's no fixing this. We just got to ride this until collapse. I'm kind of a fatalist at this point, where I'm like, man, the wheels are coming off this tricycle, and it's going to be a bad wreck. And just bring the wreck on at this point. So maybe after this post-apocalypse, we can rebuild what's left of the ashes. So how do we fix the lobbying special interest thing?
Yeah, it's difficult because I'm sure you guys are getting plenty of mail. You see different ads or mailers that come out that aren't sent from a campaign; they're sent from a different group. That you see the note at the bottom, not paid for or endorsed by any candidate or candidates committee, and you get a lot of that in these races. And I think you have to look at what role that they can play, and you run into constitutional issues and in Supreme Court cases with that kind of thing. But you got to take a deep
Citizens
dive.
United was the worst decision, one of the worst decisions the Supreme Court has ever made. Sorry to interrupt.
No, you're fine. It's just that issue of trying to figure out what role outside groups can play in a lot of these elections because they're not limited by the same amount of money as a candidate has from a individual donation. And you don't know where that money's coming from. You can't see, okay, this is the person that gave all the money to this group to send out mailers, or to send out ads on Facebook or send out a commercial, whatever it is. So I think it's taking a deep dive, and obviously this is something that would have to also occur at the federal level. It wouldn't just be a hey state of Ohio thing, but what role those outside groups can play in elections, in specific districts and statewide things. So it's obviously different race to race, but trying to find ways to get dark money out of a lot of these campaigns.
We're screwed. We're screwed. Ah, Steve, I thought you had the answer, buddy. I thought you were going to go in there and you were going to fix it, and Ohio was going to be a new golden age. But now you're telling us that we're left with the same people that like don't know what the heck they're doing in Iran and Robert.
Steven, in case you haven't caught on,
what's on your mind, man?
in case you haven't caught on, Cody doesn't think it's morning in America anymore.
No, it's beyond sunset. Go ahead.
Well, what about property tax, Stephen?
Yeah.
What can we do about with property tax? There's a lot of momentum with wanting to completely abolish taxes. I think in our forum recently you had spoke on that, and if I recall, and correct me if I'm wrong, I think you said you definitely believed there was some reform needed, but you weren't totally sure like if abolition was the right way to go. Especially without some alternative funding mechanisms. So again, correct me if I'm wrong, but is that how you feel, or have you changed since, or what are your thoughts on that?
No, yeah, I would say that's pretty accurate. I'm not in favor of totally eliminating property taxes, and going out and talking with voters. There's a lot that feel the same way. They feel that pressure and the concern about what's going on, but they're not in the boat of wanting to totally eliminate property taxes and looking at the effects that would have, especially, I haven't signed the petition to get the property tax abolish amendment on the ballot. I don't plan to, but if that does happen and it's on the ballot in November and it passes, it's that conversation of what do we do to find the money to, fund the necessary resources like police and fire and, funding school districts and the health departments and Board of Developmental Disabilities, that kind of thing. So it's a concern of mine. If that were to happen, I think, Ohio would be the first state without property taxes in the country, and finding a good path forward obviously would take a lot of hard work and it's not an easy issue to figure out, and it would take quite a bit of time. And obviously, as you see in Columbus, it takes a lot of time to do anything anyway. So I'm in favor of, and I've had a lot of positive feedback on this, but working towards moving Ohio to a more purchase price based model. When you buy your home, that's what your property taxes are based on. And obviously you're gonna have to find a middle ground with, people that have bought their home years ago today and figuring out where that kind of number comes into. Is it using the original purchase price and, certain valuations, specific things like that. But different states have kind of different uses or different ways of going about dealing with the purchase price based model. Florida and South Carolina, they use a couple different, I think it's a 1 or 2% increase every year, but there's a limit on how much that can go up. And different states have where you pay off your property taxes or you pay off your mortgage, then you start to wind down what you're paying in property taxes. So I think moving Ohio towards that purchase price model makes more sense to me. And a lot of voters I've talked to feel the same way. It's a big concern for our older population, that are on fixed incomes, that have retired and living off that retirement. And I don't want someone to get kicked out of their home or have to sell their house because they can't afford those property tax payments because they bought their home years ago when, obviously things were a lot cheaper. But I even talked to residents that they bought their house 7 years ago because it was $175,000 and it was the worst house on the street, they said. So we bought it, fixed it up, put 75,000 or 100,000 into it, made it look good. We keep the property up, and now their home's worth $650,000 or $80,000, and that's a huge increase.
Yeah.
So finding ways to limit what that increase is, keep people from having to go through the valuations that go in that take into consideration what someone next door to you selling their house for, but if you're not selling your home, you don't benefit from an increase in property value. So if you plan to live there till you die, then you're just paying more and more every year. So finding that way of moving Ohio to a way to relieve that burden for our residents, and make sure our seniors are being taken care of and they're not forced to sell a house. There's a woman in my ward here in Marysville I spoke with who her husband passed away, and she's in her late 70s, and she might have to sell her house because of that. She can't afford the increases, and I don't think that you shouldn't let that happen.
Yeah.
So making sure we're being responsible about it and finding ways to ease that burden, but being realistic in our approach, and making sure we're not trying to do the I guess a good phrase, and I use this for a lot of legislation that we talk about and different things on council, but not letting perfect be the enemy of good. In a perfect world, we don't have to pay property taxes, we don't have to pay income tax, sales tax, whatever it is, but that can also at times be the enemy of what we're trying to do. And if we can get good policy and good reform enacted to ease that burden, I think people are going to be in a better spot. And I was surprised, getting into the race. Obviously, the getting rid of the property tax had been a big, point. You see it on the news all the time on social media, people talking about it. But getting out and speaking with voters, there's, I would say probably 90% of the people that I've had a conversation with that if the issue just focuses on property tax or a wide range of issues, 90% of those people aren't in favor of getting rid of property taxes. They understand that there's a lot that goes into that, and we have to be responsible in what we're doing. But then also, obviously people that want to get rid of it. And I'm no fan of taxes, but making sure that we're doing things responsibly. And if we ever are to totally get rid of property taxes, having a plan in place before that happens, so we can make sure people. Yeah, I think of different rural areas around here in Union County that rely on the police and fire departments that are funded through property tax levies. If they can't get that funding from property taxes, where's that money going to come from? So finding that answer first, before that work, if that were to happen, is key.
Well, I like that quote. Don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And in the church world, we would say that'll preach. So I'll definitely use that one. So, Stephen, as you can probably see on our screen here, and for our viewers out there, we have the tax group here. Do you know who really started this group, or really started the movement? Was there somebody that spearheaded it? Was it a group? Do you kind of know what really brought this all about?
I do not. I don't have the specific person or group that started it out, but I've met different people that I guess are what you could consider leaders of that throughout the district, or obviously here in Union County, having conversations in Marion. But I don't have the specifics on who started it and what group started it, whatever that would be.
Have you talked with Commissioner No of Lake County, John Plesnick? He's involved. He was one of the ones who spearheaded it, but he's actually a tax professor at Cleveland State. Very intelligent and accomplished guy when it comes to finance and accounting and law. Have you heard of him? Have you followed any of his work?
I've heard of him. I think he might have came down and testified on a couple of different things in the committee that my boss chaired when I was at the State House, but I haven't had a conversation with him.
What about David Thomas? If you look at any of these fairly modest reforms that have been done in the State House regarding property taxes to date, which they've all happened this year, this past year. The sponsor, or one of the primary sponsors, is always State Representative David Thomas from, I think he's Ashtabula County.
Yeah.
Are you familiar with him? Have you spoken with him about your thoughts on what to do about property tax reform?
So I'm familiar with him, having worked at the State House and him being there, this current General Assembly. I haven't had any specific interactions on conversations regarding property tax, but I am aware of obviously he's leading the charge in a lot of different things down in Columbus. But when I was working there, not this current General Assembly, but the last General Assembly, the member I worked for was on the Property Tax Study Committee. Representative Romer was the chair of Ways and Means, but was also the chair of that committee as well. And looking at that, so we've had different conversations, but I haven't spoke with David Thomas. No.
You should, man,
Mhm.
because
Yeah,
it's got to be done. And the same
yeah,
thing with gutting the sides of government. I mean, all these pinheads like Mike DeWine that want to go out there and try to scare people and say, well, if you get rid of property taxes, then we're going to have to raise sales taxes to 20, 21, 22%. There has to be substantial reform across the board. You have to gut big government, and you need to look at history and when all this big government was created. It's not that old, okay? And if you look at when America was by far, hands down, its most prosperous, it's before the age of big government. So, and we're supposed to be fiscal conservatives. We're supposed to believe in the individual. We're supposed to believe in merit as opposed to entitlement just across the board and socialist redistribution. And that's what's so frustrating is that all these rhinos are out there. They carry an R by their name, but they're not Republican in the slightest. They're not conservative in the slightest. And they're giving us, the genuine, true conservatives, a bad name. So go in, man. If you get in there, work to cut government. It's like that. Now, I know you're a young fellow, Stephen. But have you seen the movie The Gladiator with
yes, yeah,
Russell Crowe? And he was like, all fit and trim and everything. And when Marcus Aurelius is dying, he says, Maximus, give Rome back to the people. Are you going to be the next Maximus? If I'm older than you, so I'm Marcus Aurelius, so I'm on my deathbed here. I'm dying. Stephen, are you going to give Ohio back to the people?
that has to be the goal. That has to be what every conservative politician's running on. We can't continue to say that we support smaller government and we support being responsible in spending when government continues to grow and spending continues to increase. If that is who we're going to say that we are as a party and as a conservative movement, that's what we have to do. It's easy to say that we're conservative, and when we have Ohio's in a good spot financially, um, but it's hard to be conservative when you don't have that money. So it's easy to say you're conservative, but hard to act on it. And I think there's a lot of people that get in the office and once you have that money in front of you, and okay, we can just spend here or there, we can just do this. It's just this program. Making sure that we're being true to what we're saying. I tell people when I'm campaigning, I'm not going to make a promise on what specifically is going to happen, what legislation we're going to pass, what we're going to do. I'm going to promise you this is what I'm going to advocate for and what I'm going to try to do. But I'm not going to make a promise that, hey, this is exactly what's going to happen, because you can't reasonably say what's going to happen. You have to
Right.
realize that you're one of 99 voices and one of hopefully 65 or more in the majority. But being responsible and with the money, with the people's money, has to be a priority for every Republican elected.
Well,
I
speaking
want
of
to see you
Marcus,
go into the General Assembly and just start, kicking butt and everything. And then when you're done throwing all these like rhino politicians out the rotunda, I want you to say, "Are you not entertained? Are you not entertained?" That's what I want to see,
he wants to
Stephen.
see celebrity deathmatch really bad.
Yeah, yeah, State House style.
Hey, I think, a lot of people would love to see something like that. I mean, going back to the Roman times, that's what they did. They entertained the working class people with violence and, things like that. Now, going back to Marcus Aurelius, though, this is just a side note. Have y'all ever read his books? I mean, the guy was very, very smart.
Yeah, he was a Renaissance man of ancient Rome. I mean,
So, side note there, I'm gonna put a little plug in there. If you're for our listeners out there, if you're looking for some really good books, just anything Marcus Aurelius, you got to go out there and read it. I think it'll give you a new perspective on life. But to your point, Cody, we were talking about budgets and like how do we get things under control again. And so I put this on the screen here. Stephen, I don't know how much, I know you're busy. So again, this isn't like a trap, hey, have you read every single page of the budget? Because I know that's pretty difficult to do when you're campaigning as hard as you've been out there. But this is just a brief overview. Have you had a chance to do any kind of diving into the budget, or is there anything that sticks out to you that has been a pain point for you that you want to focus on?
Yeah, so I would say right now while campaigning, I haven't had a chance to go back over the budget.
Sure.
Being in the legislature while the budget was being passed and worked on, obviously I have an insight into that. And the focus of where our office was paying attention to, being my boss was the chair of workforce and higher ed, was in that workforce and higher ed space. So having conversations with universities and SSI and everything that goes into funding state colleges, and then you have different programs with private colleges and groups that come in there. But as we've been campaigning, the budget's I think 6,000 pages plus. So I haven't had a chance over the last couple months to dive back into every single page. But looking at spending and being responsible in that, it becomes a challenge when you start. You have 14 different public universities, and those are continuing to grow, and challenges with enrollment within those universities because not every state school sees an extreme amount of growth since COVID. There's only a few that have had continual growth since then. So finding ways to trim back on what we're doing there and not spending money because we have. And when the legislature gets or I should say in this case, the House gets the budget from the governor, obviously there's a lot of programs that are in there from the different agencies and the governor's office has the conversations with all the people in his administration and all the universities and all the different programs that are funded before, and those get sent back over to him. I think September, October, November of the preceding year. So you get a lot of different looks at that, and each budget is wildly different depending on the House thinks one way and wants this amount of stuff funded in the budget and these different programs. And if you follow the operating budget process, it's actually really interesting because you see where everyone's perspective comes in. The governor's office is focused on a lot of different things that the legislature, maybe one chamber doesn't focus on as much. And the House passes its version of the budget out, which is different than the governor's version, and the Senate gets it and makes all their changes and has all their programs in there, and that's wildly different from the House's version. So then you have to go back and kind of work through all of that. And that takes time and obviously a lot of long hours going through and highlighting different things that are very important to different members and kind of working through on every member has let's say so there's 65 Republicans, 45 50 of them have this specific item that they're focused on and want to have in there, so that's included. And then you have more certain narrowing down, hey, this member, there's only one thing that this member is put in here, and that's the only item that only time it comes up in the budget. So then you got to look through, where are we spending this money at? So it's different member to member, chamber to chamber. All three of the versions of the budget are completely different until you get the one that gets agreed to at the end of the day. And then obviously the governor goes through there and can veto different things that the legislature passes. And it's until you get the final budget passed, it's up in the air on what exactly is going to be funded until you're down there in the last late June, kind of going through that process and then reconciling the differences.
So one of my concerns, I'm sure Cody will echo this too, because we're fiscal conservatives on this show. So looking at the budget here for fiscal year 2026 and 2027, Medicaid It's taking up 45% of the budget. As you can see, that's on our fancy little pie chart here from the governor's office. This is the largest part of the pie, and I think there's obviously people out there that need assistance,
Yep.
who are struggling. You know, single mothers, seniors, and things like that. But and this kind of mirrors federal funding, the federal budget. It doesn't look like it would be sustainable long term. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, there's the conversation comes up with the budget, especially at the state of Ohio. The goal or the focus of all these budgets is to medicate, educate, and incarcerate. You have all those different programs that tie into that between primary and secondary education, higher education, the prison system in Ohio, and then obviously Medicaid and healthcare. So going through and finding ways to cut back on the reliance on a lot of those systems. I think the conversation comes up with as people get later in life, they're more reliant upon Medicaid. They have more health problems, more health issues, things that come up that someone in high school, 20-year-old, 30-year-old, 40-year-old isn't necessarily worried about. But then you get into the later stages in life, and that becomes a lot more of a focus. So I think working and finding ways to cut down on excessive costs in different areas, different departments. And I think a good example is finding ways to use preventative medicines and kind of focuses. So you're going after that front end and you're helping people, they're in a better situation to start out. So when later in life, they're not as reliant on those services and, don't need to use different Medicaid services as much as they would have. So I think, a lot of the focus now gets put on the back end on when you're sick, when you're, frail, when you're in this situation, and, you're using that to help fund healthcare. But I think trying to move that towards a more front end services, helping people out before they get to that situation, I think is a key to start cutting back on the over reliance and the cost that goes into funding all that. Because it's like anything, it starts out, okay, here's an issue we have. Think of your house. There's an issue going on. You address it up front. Sure, it might cost a little bit, but odds are addressing it before it becomes a major issue costs a lot less than letting it build up and up and up over time. And at the end of the day, it costs a lot more than if you had addressed it before it became that major issue.
Did you see that video or that interview that State Rep, I think it was Brenner, did, talking about education in the state of Ohio? It was this week. And
I have not, no.
yeah, so he was talking about per capita or per pupil costs in high schools or in what is that, secondary education. I think it was limited to secondary, but anyway, public schools. Let's just say public schools. You know what the figure is for the average amongst urban school districts in the state of Ohio, according to Representative Brenner?
I haven't seen that video, so I wouldn't have that number.
$37,000. The average in rural districts is something, I think, like 13, if I recall, right around there. Why are we spending so much money attempting to educate people? You can look at the quality of education. You can throw as much money as you want, and you're not going to get a much better result. So there needs to be substantial reform within the Ohio Department of Education, within just how we're funding schools, which is the basis of the property tax problem, since 60% of your property taxes are going to your public schools. And then, like I said, you're getting, you want to talk about poor performance. We might have mentioned this last time, but I think it was last year, one of the school board members for Marion City Schools did an interview and was talking about 8th grade proficiency in Marion City schools. Do you know what it was for math, according to this board member?
What would that
Two
be?
percent, two
2%. Yeah,
percent. And for reading, I think he said it was 5%. Abysmal. You'd have you'd have that proficiency, Stephen, if you drop some baby into the jungle and had him raised by wolves like Mowgli of Rudyard Kipling's The Jungle Book. I mean, that baby is going to come out and probably out of 100 babies dropped, probably at least 2% are going to be proficient in math, you know, by the time they get to school age. So, what are we wasting all this money and getting nothing for it? We need substantial reform from a cost standpoint and from a quality standpoint. And all these politicians, all these educators, they just go and they say, "Oh, we need more money, more money, more money." And then these urban districts, 37,000. So what college tuition costs we're paying for a subpar education of our students in the state of Ohio?
yeah, it's a frustrating situation, that we find ourselves in. I think a lot of it involves who you elect, on the school boards, and that are involved in those local districts that have a obviously have the most say in what happens to on the day-to-day basis within every school district. So you can keep throwing money at the issue, but if at the end of the day the same people are in office there that believe the same things and have the same ideas on spending, and how to do one thing over another, you're going to get the same result. So it's hard because I'm a supporter of local control, and I support the people of Marion, the people of Marysville. They have different thoughts on things. They need to have a say in what their school board's doing and going, what's going on there. So it's finding that you can keep throwing money into those large urban areas that are having a lot of problems, but if the same people are still in office and still making those decisions, you're going to find the same results, and it's not going to get better. You're exactly right. Going through and finding what changes have to happen in these agencies and the funding mechanisms and what we're doing as a state to fund this stuff. Um, at the end of the day, that's the role the state legislature is going to be able to play. But people have to elect. Elections have consequences, and people have to elect the right people into office. In their school boards, and it's frustrating for me to see so little people get involved, and care about those races and understand what's going on there, because your money's going to that race, and that's affecting your day-to-day life. So it's a frustrating situation. You can't keep throwing money at the problem because it's not going to make it any better. It's a change in philosophy and how people want to go about running a school district, and how education is looked at as a whole.
Yeah.
Now,
Well,
how much of it though? Because you hear a lot of complaint. You can look at their financials over the last 5 years, 10 years, 15 years, and you can see exponential increases in hiring, in salaries and benefits, which of course are going to be your number one expense of
Mhm.
any operation, government or otherwise. And you'll get pushback and say, well, we've hired all these administrators because of state mandates, you
right.
know, or we've hired all these. Now, they've got every kid on an IEP nowadays. If it doesn't matter your issue. I mean, I may feel really old. I'm not super old. I was in school in the 90s, and you had maybe one or two what we called special kids that were attending special classes and stuff. And this was a public school district in Marion County. Nowadays, every kid's on an IEP. Every kid has some issue, and then when you got an IEP, oh, I need an aide, or I need this specialized teacher, or whatever. Is this all stuff that comes down from the state as a mandate to the district? Say, hey guys, you have to do this. So we TS just tax your local residents more so you can hire somebody to do is that how you understand it? And if it really is, if it's not their discretion and not their local control and a decision by their superintendent or their school board, then that crap has to change. Go back to how it was when it actually worked better. And that's how I would say for most things. If you look at where government expanded, I can take you back on the local level, 1967. 1967 is when state of Ohio passed a whole bunch of laws enabling uh, transfer taxes, enabling uh, uh, income tax or sales tax increases at the local level. They really pumped up, and then the expenditures in the state of Ohio doubled between 1971 and 1972. Doubled that quickly because of the passing of the establishment of the state income tax. So go back to the way things were structured prior to 1967. And that's not the dark ages. We were booming. We had industries everywhere. Everybody was employed, wealth, prosperity, before the age of big government at the local and state level. But anyway, answer my question about the mandate or alleged mandates on these school districts.
Yeah, so there.
Is
I
that
mean,
true?
there's specific. I mean, there's legislation that obviously dictates, what goes into an IEP, and what the requirements are if a student is on an IEP, and how to go about getting an IEP, that kind of thing. So that there is legislation and laws at the state level that do that. But I've, as a graduate of Marysville schools, I've had family that has worked in Marysville schools and siblings that have been on IEPs because they were adopted and coming through, and they had students learn differently. I guess I look at it as it's not a one size fits all policy. I think works best. It has to be student focused education, and that goes into not every kid needs to go to public school. Not every kid needs to go to a private school. It depends on that student. So I think you see that you know difference between districts. Some districts they have more resources, so they have more to work with. Being in a school in 2026 is a lot different than when I graduated high school in 2017. So figuring out, walking that line, and are there districts that have a lot that goes into administration and funding, what the different administrators are doing. Sure, of course, there's different districts that are obviously very wealthy. I think of you look at like Upper Arlington, in Columbus, they have a very wealthy district. They can kind of do what they want, and they're going to have a different result than a much more rural district like Fairbanks. So it's finding a good situation for each district because things are different nowadays. And I think if we look at education and want it to be the same, if you go into a classroom and look at things and it's the same exact way that it was in 1930, then we're doing a disservice to students because things have to change as the times change, as technology changes. Students learn differently than they used to. There's a lot more hands-on learning and individualized focused on student learning. There's some things that are good that come from that, some things that are bad. There's obviously right now, and as I've grown up and gone through the education system, you have a lot more of that teaching to the test and the focus on that, and that's to the detriment of some students because they don't learn best that way. But I wouldn't say every student's on an IEP. I've seen obviously there's more now. Education I think needs to be more individualized for each student, but there's laws that are in place that districts have to follow, and they can't just randomly deny or give an IEP to a student. It can come down from the state level and kind of dictate. You have a lot of different mandates, and I think there's a lot that goes into it. If you look at the Ohio House, for example, the education or I forget if it's titled primary and secondary or public education or education committee, whatever that one is that focuses on K through 12 learning. They typically have the most bills referred to their committee, them, Ways and Means, and then obviously Finance. They get a lot of legislation that brings on more mandates, either funded or unfunded mandates. So you see a lot of that coming down, and it's easy for a legislator to say, "Hey, this is a good idea. It makes sense, and we're going to pass it down to the schools, and they have to do this." So I think that's where you see a lot more districts starting to hire more administrative work. Um, there are districts that overdo it, and you have to cut back and you have to be responsible. But it's hard to find people that want to get involved. I look at people my age that graduate through high school and go to college and become a teacher. It's fewer and fewer people every year, and people that finding someone. We have a great superintendent here in Marysville that graduated from here. Has gone on. I believe it was up in Mount Vernon. Was superintendent for a while, and came back recently. But there's a lot that goes into public education nowadays, and it's I look at it. I'm not an expert on every single issue revolving around public education. Um, there's more and more every day that comes up from the state level that increases that, and I think it's one being careful to look at things as it's just waste. There's obviously waste at every level. There's waste in every school district, in every city, in every township. There's ways you can cut back and have a lean operation. But at least in my eyes, my focus when it comes to K through 12 education is being having a student focused way of going about doing this and making sure we're doing best by our students while being responsible for the taxpayer at the same time. So it can't be a one size fits all. There's a lot of testing that goes into different things between IEPs or between what a certain administrator has to do. But I think obviously, yeah, there's people that overdo it and start spending more and more on different positions and different districts. You can't look at every district the same. Marysville and Upper Arlington are a lot different, especially when it comes to funding and the amount of money they have and support that they get. But yeah, we have to be responsible as a state, not to just continue to put mandates on the different districts. When there's things that make sense that we're doing, yes, obviously we have to do that, but it's not a let's just pass this legislation because it sounds good. There's real world impacts and unintended consequences that come about from a lot of the legislation. But there are districts that do.
I know I'm going to cut you off here because I think that we have to get rid of those mandates or at least extremely limit them.
I agree. There's
out of hand putting it's dictating. If that's true, then all you people out there wanting reductions in your property tax bill, we just talked about one of the main reasons then. It's the state of Ohio. It's these boneheads, these corrupt, do-nothing people that just pass this legislation for whatever reason. Maybe because it sounds good. Oh, we want everybody to have their own hired attendant. Every student should have an adult aide there aiding them or whatever they're doing. Or we want 20 psychologists for this rural school district or whatever. Now we got Superintendent Marion City Schools, who's I heard him pitching a month ago about having a full service clinic or like healthcare in the school district. Right. That's not education. I'm sorry. You can say, Stephen, that 1930, a lot of stuff has changed in education. Not really. The fundamentals of learning have not changed. The quality of education has declined since 1930. No question, hands down. Technology may be different. Now they're putting everything's digital. So you got people that can't write a letter in school, or they can't converse, with somebody. Are we doing a service to these kids? No. And we're getting stuck with a bill in these urban districts of $37,000 per head. I don't know. It's a sensitive topic. I understand it.
Yeah.
But if you're wanting property tax reform, if it's not going to get abolished, then get the state out of this whole business of these mandates. Let these school districts run themselves as they should and get back to focusing on reading, writing, and arithmetic, as they used to say. All right, Stephen. Well, we've crested here past the hour, approaching the 1.5 hour mark here on the Patriot Report. So, what would you like to say as a final pitch to voters out there in the 86th district? I'll give you
Yeah.
the final word.
Well, I appreciate you guys having me on again, like I said at the beginning. But just to anyone out there listening, watching, this district is my home. I'm proud to call it home my whole life, with family living from southern Union County all the way into city of Marion and everywhere in between. I care deeply about what happens in this district, and I want to make sure that we have someone in Columbus, that has that connection, that has the experience at both the state and local level, and cares as much as I do about what goes on here. I am focused on the citizens of Union County and Marion counties, and want to make sure that the person who represents us feels that same way. So I'm humbly asking for your vote, and hopefully come Tuesday, I received that. And if you have any questions before then, or have a concern about something and want to see where I'm at, don't hesitate to reach out. That's my website there on the screen, wolfforohio.com. I'm more than happy to talk with you, and hopefully, see you in the last couple of days here as we're getting closer and closer to Election Day.
Excellent. Well, there you have it, folks. We've heard from Stephen Wolf, running for state rep of the 86th district. So we have the big election coming up on Cinco de Mayo this coming Tuesday. Where are you going to be spending the election night, Stephen?
I know for most of the day we'll be out at the polls, meeting with voters as they come in, handing out, business cards, reminding everyone that there's a good option with the last name of Wolf on the ballot to vote for. But I'm not sure where we'll be, Tuesday night. Just depends.
All right, we're going to be running probably from 7:30 to when we finally get results. If Marion County's last several elections are any indication, we might have results by 1 in the morning. I don't know, but feel free to pop in for 15 minutes or so during that election night coverage. We'd love to have you back on here, and I'm sure the folks would too. So, all right, folks. Well, until our next show, I think is going to be that election night show. We might have another guest on Monday, so we're still working on planning that out. So be sure to check out the Facebook page to see if we will have a show on Monday and who that very special guest is. I'm just going to put a teaser out there. Just dangle it like a carrot in front of you.
And YouTube. Make sure you follow us on YouTube.
Yeah, follow on YouTube. What's that page name? Ohio Patriots Patriots Network?
Yeah, Ohio Patriots Network. We have a YouTube page now, so you can follow us on Facebook and YouTube. When we do our streams, we stream on both platforms. So we just want to make sure we get this message out to everybody.
Yeah. Check it out. Like, share, comment. We're not evil people. So for Robert Randall, for our special guest, the Patriot Report. Remember, folks, a patriot.
Have a good night.
Thank you.